In this video, I wanted to take a look at one of the most basic elements you'll be using in Adobe Illustrator, which is the Shape tool. It is located up here at the top on the toolbar. If you click and hold down, you can select various types of shapes. The one I'm going to start with is just the rectangle, because there's one point that I want to look at here, so I'm just going to click and drag out a rectangle. If I want a perfect square, I can hold Shift to click and drag out. This applies as well when you're scaling something up and down. We'll look at that in a minute. But if I place that there and then go back to my arrow, which by the way, the arrow is always going to be your default point. If ever you want to switch to moving something else, go back to your arrow. It's the easiest thing to do. It will save you a lot of trouble if you just make that your default position. So I'm going to go back to the arrow, and you'll notice that when I do, bounding boxes appear around the edges of the shape. Now I can use this to scale up and down, and again, holding Shift keeps it in proportion. If I let go of Shift, I can do any shape, but if I hold Shift, it keeps it in proportion. And I can also hover around the edge to get a rotate, and I can rotate it. In fact, if I do that rotation and then hold Shift, it keeps it to 90-degree angles essentially. I'm sorry, 45-degree angles would probably be more accurate. So that's one way to do it when it comes to rotating. But what I want to really point out about a shape here is that there's two elements to a shape. And shapes in general, whether they're created with the shape tool like we're looking at now or with the pen tool, which we'll look at much later, they each have a fill and a stroke. If I go up to the top menu here, or if I just look at the color picker down here, each represents the fill and the stroke. So the fill, of course, means the color of the actual shape itself. The stroke, which is a little bit hard to see because it's thin, I'll thicken it up a little using the stroke weight here, is the line that goes around the edges. By default, it would probably have both. Each behaves differently, however. A shape can be edited and erased. I'll give a demonstration here. I can erase parts of the shape, and you'll notice that it lines the stroke around the edge. The stroke always goes around the edge no matter what shape you're working with. So that means that they behave differently than a fill does. I'm going to remove that. You can, with any particular shape that you bring out, either remove the fill or remove the stroke. You do that just by pulling down the drop and going to the option, the swatch option, that is a white square with a red line through it. I can also do it down here on the color picker by adding a stroke and then going to the none option. I can do that same thing by switching to the fill and going to the none option. Even if I remove both the fill and the stroke, it may be hard to see, but the shape is still here because everything I lay down creates a path. Now I'm getting into a lot of terminology here, but just be aware that a path is kind of the underlying, it is the core of everything you design in Illustrator. They exist whether they have color or not as long as you draw them out. But since it is here, I can add color to it. I can also double click on this color square to give myself a color picker, and then I can use this to select a new color. So this is one of many ways to change color of a shape in Illustrator, and you do it through the fill and the stroke options. More often than not, students will leave a stroke on there without thinking about it. You should only use a stroke if you have a reason to use one. For example, one reason would be that I do not want a fill, I just want a stroke around the edge, and then of a fairly heavy weight. Say if I'm creating boxes that I want to put text inside, or something to that effect. So always be aware of that. Don't have a stroke on there just by default. Have a stroke when you need one. Sometimes you will need them to go around the edges of a shape. Sometimes you'll need just the stroke itself. But never do anything unintentionally when it comes to design. Now I'm going to go ahead and leave this out here. And I'm going to open up the Layers palette and look at one more thing in regards to creating shapes. I'm actually going to go to the Polygon tool. I'm going to drag one out here, and then I'm going to, as I'm holding it, I'm going to use the arrow keys up and down to dictate exactly how many sides this polygon has. This is a really neat feature. It's one that you can only do in, I believe, Illustrator and InDesign. Photoshop does not allow you to do it, which is irritating. But this is a nice feature. So I'll go ahead and draw out one of these. And I'm going to give it a fill. And I'm going to remove the stroke. Now, you'll notice in my layers palette, these are both on the same layer. For the sake of simplicity, for the sake of organization, I want them to be on separate layers. That's actually fairly easy to do. One of the great things about Illustrator is it's very easy to copy and paste elements or cut and paste elements depending on what you need. For example, you can do this on the keyboard with Command C, but I'll do it up here just so it's visible. Edit, copy, and then edit, paste. Now I have two identical triangles. This is useful for hundreds of thousands of reasons inside Illustrator, but the one I'm going to show you here, I actually don't need that one. I'll select this triangle that I want to move to a new layer in order to keep this organized. Go up to Edit and Cut, create a new layer, and as long as I have that one selected, Edit and Paste. And now this is on a new layer. I can toggle its visibility on and off separately from the other one, which is really handy. And I can do something really useful as well. For example, if I'm trying to manipulate the triangle and I keep accidentally selecting this square behind it, I can use this second block next to the eye inside the layers palette to toggle the lock on this layer. If I toggle that lock, I can no longer select the square that I created. I can only work on the unlocked layer. So this is really useful. Be aware that it's there. It will keep you from messing up other designs as you're working on multiple layers.